Well, good morning, boys and girls. I'm so glad you're here this morning. I see some people that are coming around, and we've got an exciting story for you. Well, I got to be honest, things didn't start this morning the way I had hoped. Had some technical issues getting the broadcast going here, but we'll try to figure that out next time. But we'll try to make do with what we have today. So, without further ado, let's kind of get into our story here. Thank you again, Miss Ari, for showing us all those amazing moves. Again, nothing can compare to you, and we just love singing just like you were leading us through. I need to get some drumsticks next time. Well, as you know, we got a lot going on today, and you may ask, well, what in the world is going on here? We got this poor lady not looking so great here. We got a couple of guys looking around, and I look a little bit different than I normally do. Well, we'll see more about that in just a minute. But I want to set the stage here. Today, we're going to be talking about, I don't know, who are we talking about each week? Jesus, exactly. Now, previously, we've been talking about how Jesus came and how he's the Messiah. And that means he's the Savior of the world. He's the one that God has sent to save us all. He's the promised one that all the old prophets had talked about 1,000 years before. Well, we've been studying about how Jesus has been declared the Messiah, and we've started a new unit last week where we're talking about ways that Jesus is serving. And the way that he's serving people is sort of showing us that he is the Messiah. He's the Son of God. And last week, we saw an amazing healing. If you remember last week, we talked about these 10 guys that had some sort of skin disease. And these 10 guys, they were outcast from society. They couldn't hang around anybody. They had to stay separate. And yet, when they saw Jesus coming, they asked Jesus, and Jesus healed them. In fact, he said, go ahead and show yourself to the priest, who was kind of like the doctor for that matter. And he said, just go show yourself. And they took a step of faith, and they started walking, and on the way, they were instantly healed. And of all those 10 that were healed, only one of them came back and thanked Jesus, just one of them. And we talked about that, about being thankful, and about how Jesus said that the man's faith had saved him as well. Well, today, we're going to be talking a little bit about what's going on here. And this sad girl, we got a sad situation. So here's the deal. Jesus and his followers, Jesus and his disciples, they are, again, around the area of the Sea of Galilee. And there's a man who is the father of this young girl here. And this young girl is extremely sick. She's 12 years old, so she's maybe just a little bit older than most of you. But she's 12 years old, and she's very, very sick. So Jairus is the father's name, not this guy, this is somebody else. But Jairus sent for help. Jairus, I think, heard that Jesus was going to be nearby, so let's go check out what's happening over in the Sea of Galilee area. So, let's get going here. Where are we? All right. There we go. Good morning. Yes, we are a little bit different looking. I told you that I looked a little bit different, and things looked a little bit different. So just like we had a little different looking figure, got something different here too. So we're halfway there. We're almost getting rid of it all, but we're getting it trimmed up a bit. Got my first haircut in like 13 weeks. So let's though find out what's happening here in our story. So we had the sick girl, and her dad's name is Jairus, and today we're going to be in the book of Mark. We're going to be in Mark chapter 5, and we're going to skip some of the first part because that's a different story, but we're going to pick up in Mark chapter 5 in verse 21. And it says, when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. So this is an area where Jesus is doing a lot of his teaching. It's around the Sea of Galilee, and very often there would be so many people crowded around that he would get into a little boat and he'd go out into the water and he'd teach from there, and the people could be on the shore and they could hear him. and then he would cross the lake. He'd go to the other side, and people would listen to him teach. And then sometimes the crowds would get so big he'd have to move, and he'd get back in the boat with his disciples, and they'd go across the other side of the lake. They'd kind of go out, and there were different places, and word would spread, and people would hear, Jesus is on the way, Jesus is coming. And people would run, and they would go, and they would want to hear Jesus teaching, and probably, hopefully, see a miracle or have a miracle performed for them, because people heard that this guy was unlike any of the other teachers. This guy was healing people, like people that had diseases that could not be healed back then were miraculously being healed. So that probably is what led this man named Jairus to come look for Jesus. Now Jairus, he was a synagogue leader, which means, again, back then, the Jews met in what we call a synagogue. Like today, we would call it like a church, right? But back then, it was a synagogue. That's where they would meet, and they would read about the law. They would learn about God. And he was like a leader in that synagogue. And as you know, some of the Jewish leaders weren't so sure about Jesus. They thought maybe Jesus wasn't teaching the right thing. But then other Jewish leaders, we learned about Nicodemus earlier. Some of them were believing, and they were coming to Jesus. Well, let's read what happened with Jairus. So, picking up in verse 22. One of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there to the area where Jesus was teaching. And he saw Jesus, and he fell at his feet, and he pleaded with Jesus. Now, let's take a look at what's going on here. We've got Jesus, and there's so many people crowded around him, and this guy, Jairus, comes up and he's pleading with Jesus. I'm sorry, I can't tell if I got my camera right here. You might be seeing a little more than I expect, but Jairus, he came up and he's asking Jesus, he's pleading with Jesus. He says, please, my daughter is sick. And listen to what he asked Jesus. I'm going to read you here from verse 23. My daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So, Jesus agreed. Jesus went along with him. Well, as he's going, look at all the people that are starting to crowd around. I mean, this is Jesus. The people are crowding around Jesus. I mean, there's so many people. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. That just means they were, everybody's trying to get real close. It's almost like sometimes you see on TV today, like when a movie star or like a famous singer is found in public, and all these people say, oh, there's so-and-so, and everybody runs up to him, and they want to get an autograph, and they want to get a picture, and they want to be as close to him as possible. It was kind of like this. But you had back then a lot of people that were desperate. They were needing healing. They were going through all sorts of terrible things. Well, this man Jairus, he came to Jesus, and he's like, Jesus, please come and heal my daughter. All you have to do is, touch her, and she'll be healed. He had that much faith. And Jesus agreed. Jesus said, okay, let's go. Well, as they're on the way, this large crowd, and listen to this, in verse 25, a woman was there who had been bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors, and she'd spent all the money that she had, but instead of getting any better, she was getting worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd. Now you see her here? She came up behind Jesus, and she thought, if I can just touch his clothing, then I will be healed. She just wanted to touch his robe. Now, Jesus was probably wearing something a little different than what this guy is here. But she thought, even if I could just touch even his clothing, that will be enough to heal me. She had so much faith that Jesus was the healer. He was the teacher. He was the Son of God. Well, she touched his cloak, like the robe that Jesus was wearing. In verse 29, immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was free from her suffering. That's amazing. But it's even stranger. Listen to what happens next. In verse 30, at once Jesus realized that power had gone out of him. And he turned around in the crowd and he was asking, who touched my clothes? Well, I mean, there was a huge crowd of people, more people than I'm showing here. And he turned around and all these people were coming up to him. He said, who touched my clothes? Well, the disciples said, you see all these people crowding against you, and yet you can ask, who touched me? Well, probably a lot of people were touching Jesus and getting close to him and like just reaching out their hands. And the disciples said, wait a minute, you're asking one person, like, who touched you? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, sure, I can't see if I can stand Jesus up here. Uh-oh. Then the woman, oh, there goes Jairus, there goes the woman. The woman ran around and she fell at Jesus' feet. She fell at Jesus' feet because she was maybe fearful and she was trembling and she fell at his feet and she told him the whole truth. She told him about what she had done, about she had just wanted to touch his clothing and be healed. So she told him that. And listen to what Jesus said. He said, daughter, that was just kind of a term of endearment, you know, like sweetie or something. I mean, that was something, it wasn't really his daughter, but that's what he called her. He says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Wow. So don't you know that she was just super, super excited? She had been healed completely. He wasn't angry at all. He told her to go on her way because your faith has freed you from your suffering. Now, I want you to remember those. Remember those words that Jesus said. He said, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering. So she went on about her way. Meanwhile, who is still there? Jairus is still there. And there's all these other people around. They're watching him and they're like seeing what's happening. But remember, what has Jairus asked Jesus? Jairus has asked Jesus to come heal my daughter. Just like that lady had been bleeding for 12 years. Well, he has a daughter that's 12 years old and she's very, very sick and she's about to die. Now, let's think about this. So Jairus is there and suddenly this woman has come up and Jesus has healed this woman and this is amazing and everybody's thinking about this. But then look at verse look at verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some men came. Uh-oh, we have somebody else coming in. Let's see who these men are. Remember, we showed you what was going on at Jairus' house a bit earlier. Well, suddenly, some men came. And these men came up, and they were from Jairus' house. And these men said, basically telling Jairus, listen to what they told him. They said, when Jesus was still speaking, they came up and they said, Jairus, your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher Jesus anymore? Oh, no, she's dead. Well, ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue rulers, he told the synagogue ruler Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe. Now, Jairus is probably super sad. He's just been told that his daughter's dead by the people that were at his house. And yet Jesus says, don't be worried. Have faith. Now, this is interesting. Jesus didn't let anybody else follow him to Jairus' house except for Peter, James, and John. And those were three of his disciples. Now, let's see what happened. He let Peter, James, and John follow him, and they went to the house of Jairus. So they went to where Jairus was, where he lived, rather, and Jesus was looking for the girl. So Jesus walks in, and you got all these people We've got the poor girl. You got all these people that are around. Now listen to what happens here. This is also kind of interesting. So, Jesus shows up with Peter, James, and John, and when they came to the home of the leader, Jesus saw just a big old commotion. There were people crying. There were people wailing. I mean, there were people shouting. They were like, oh, they were making all these sounds and crying loudly. Well, Jesus went in and he told them, why all this commotion and wailing and yelling and stuff? The child is not dead, but just asleep. What? All the people, they were like laughing at him. They're like, what do you mean he's just asleep? They were laughing at him. And Jesus just put all the people out. So he told all the people to go. He said, put everybody out. So in the room, he only had Jesus, the disciples, the girl's father, Jairus, and the girl's mother. And Jesus went in to where the child was. And he took her by the hand and he told her, Talitha koum. And that means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately, the girl stood up and she walked around. Jesus took her by the hand. Well, after he had called her up, she started walking around. And everybody was completely astonished. They were amazed. Now, Jesus gave strict orders to the people not to let anyone know about this. And then he told them, hey, go give the girl something to eat. You know, she's probably hungry. Wow! So Jesus performs 2 miracles, all like back to back. Jesus is there with Jairus. Jairus approaches him. Jairus asks him to heal his daughter, and he agrees. And then on the way, this woman comes, and she has a disease. She's been bleeding for 12 years. Jesus instantly heals her. It's amazing what Jesus did all in this short amount of time. Now, that's the main point of our story today. Jesus healed these people. Now, I want you to think back. What were a couple of things that Jesus had in common with how he interacted with these 2 people? Notice the woman. Was he angry at the woman for having faith that Jesus could heal her? Well, of course not. Jesus told her, said, your faith has healed you. Did he ask her to tell him this thing or to say this thing or to go do this? Or did he ask her to do a bunch of things? He said, no, your faith has healed you. She had enough faith that Jesus was the Son of God, that Jesus was the healer. And then with Jairus, first of all, look at the ways that Jairus had faith. He came to Jesus, first of all. I mean, he was desperate. He had nowhere else to go. He tried everything. His daughter was dying. He's like, I'm going to go to the healer. I'm going to go to this man named Jesus. So he goes to Jesus with faith. And while he's there waiting for Jesus and while they're on their way, there's kind of a little timeout while he heals that woman and had that interaction. So do you think Jairus was getting mad? He's like, no, we need to hurry. We need to get to my daughter. Was he mad like that? No, he wasn't mad. And then the second example of faith. Jesus told Jairus, ignore what these people are telling you. These people are telling him that your daughter is dead. So most people will probably say, well, she's dead. There's nothing I can do. But Jesus said, no, have faith. Your daughter's not dead. She's only sleeping. And then all the people there were like, what do you mean she's sleeping? We know what dead is. And she was dead. Jesus goes in and he takes her by the hand. He grabs her body's hand and says, little girl, get up. And she did. She got up right away. And, to show that she wasn't like some ghost or some zombie or something. I mean, Jesus is like, hey, here she is. Give her some food. She's hungry. Give her something to eat. So in both of these examples, the faith of the person that was healed or was asking for healing is involved. And boys and girls, that teaches us sometimes that there may be some things that we can't possibly understand ourselves and that we can't fix. And we go to and sometimes there's nothing to do. We have to have faith. And sometimes having faith, you have faith in something that seems impossible. And here's the beauty of having faith in Jesus. He tells us that when we have faith in him, that he is who he says he is, and the miracles demonstrate that he's from God, and his teaching demonstrates that he's from God. And he says that those that believe in him, that believe that he is the Messiah, or he is the Christ, or he is the Son of God, then God is going to forgive the sins of those people. So faith not only can bring physical healing, like it did for this woman who had the bleeding disease, or for the little girl who had just died. And we're going to see many other examples of where Jesus healed people, even some cases where he brought people back to life. But having faith means sometimes we have to trust in what we can't fully understand. And Jesus tells us we have faith in him, then we will be not only physically healed, well, we may not be instantly physically healed, but we will certainly be spiritually healed. We can be healed of the sin that we have. And the sin is what we have that makes us choose our own thing. And we've talked about that before, and we'll get into that more again, but we talk about repentance. We talk about turning away from our bad ways and turning back to go the right way. And Jesus is there, and he's showing us that in this example here. So I hope you've enjoyed this story about, again, Jesus, again, he's serving the people. In this unit we're talking about, he's healing people, he's acting as a servant, and all the while he's demonstrating that he's more than just a doctor. He's more than just a man that can somehow heal people, but he is in fact the Son of God. And we're going to be learning about that more as we go. So I'm glad that you're here this morning. And I'm excited for you. I don't know if you can see, but I've got my Bolt shirt on. This is the closest I can get to a Bolt, which is our Vacation Bible School. If you haven't been participating in Vacation Bible School this week, well, we're doing an online version. And even if you're not, if you're just watching this here now, we're going to have that available all summer long to access those materials. So check out our contact information. You're watching this video from this group, One Heart Church, and we'll be glad to have you in our Vacation Bible School. So in the meantime, it's now time for us to end this story and to hop over to our Zoom meeting for those that are in our Bible study classes. Boys and girls, look forward to seeing you there, and have a great morning. Take care.